It's weird to have a favorite war, maybe even a bit sadistic. However, I have to admit, I do have one. In my defense though, it was a war with no casualties. The premise of the Whiskey War is as silly as its name, lasting for all of 50 years, taking place on an island barely 1 square kilometers. With a death toll of 0, the Canadians and Danes fought hard and long. In 2022, they finally publicly did it. In this video we are gonna look at the Whiskey War, how it started, how it went, and how it ended. Wanna know more about it or fact check this video? Because there's nothing better than being a skeptical bastard? My sources are linked below, either in the description or in a pinned comment. But before we get into it, as you can see, this is my very first video. I'm planning to fill this channel up with video essays about internet culture, history, strange true crime or scientific cases. If that sounds interesting to you and you want to help me in my YouTube journey, maybe consider subscribing. It would be highly appreciated. Without further ado, let's get into the video. The Whiskey War, back when war was still fun. Let's set the scene. In the Kennedy Canal, between Greenland and Ellesmere Island, lies a small island, easily mistaken for a large rock. It's barely larger than 1 square kilometers, exists out of nothing but barren rock and ice. There's seemingly nothing special about it, and still, for 50 years, there was a debate over who owned it. Indigenous people of Greenland and Canada had come across the island for centuries while hunting polar bears, but it wasn't officially discovered until Charles Francis Halt's third Arctic expedition in the 19th century, an attempt to map out the Arctic islands, which was happening a lot in this time by American and British explorers. The island was named after the nickname of the Greenlandic guide Hans Henrik. His real name, by the way, was Sir Sack, and I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. So I've been editing this video and just looking up pictures from Hans Island to put in this video, and I find out that the Greenlandic name for Hans Island is Tartupaluk, and this is the first time I'm reading it from Wikipedia. Like, thanks National Geographic for not putting that in your article. So Hans Island, also known as Tartupaluk, which means kidney-shaped, which is very fitting in my opinion. The island was insignificant until the 1970s, when Canada and Denmark started to negotiate their Arctic territories and trying to create a border between Greenland and Canada. Greenland, by the way, is officially a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. So I might use Greenland and Denmark intertwinedly. And in the story you can see that officials of Greenland also sometimes act as if they are officials from Denmark. So with any confusion, you have Canada on one side and Denmark and Greenland on the other side. Reading the original agreement from 1973, it becomes clear why these cold barrens were important for both Canada and Denmark, and that is natural resources. The Arctic is not only a great place to fish, but also holds tons of oil, natural gas and minerals. You can see how sensitive of an issue it was by Article 3 in this agreement. In view of the inadequacies of existing hydrography charts for certain areas and failing a precise determination of the low water line in all sectors, along the coast of Greenland and the eastern coast of the Canadian Arctic Islands, neither party shall issue licenses for exploitation of mineral resources in areas bordering the dividing line without prior agreement of the other party, as the exact determination of the geographical coordinates of the points of the part of the dividing line bordering upon areas in question. In summary, this article says they aren't even allowed to mine resources around the border to avoid conflict, so that's how sensitive this issue is. So even though Hans Island is small, the possibility of the land being highly valuable was high. which makes it easier to understand why neither of the parties wanted to surrender it. So by signing the treaty in 1973, they just decided to have the border go around it. And the conflict started. But the war had not yet. That all began with a set of curious circumstances. A decade later, in 1984, an article appeared in a small Greenlandish newspaper, written by the journalist Ken Harper. He describes the journey this article takes in an article he wrote in 2005, looking back at like his small article. So this is what he says about it. My article, in a little-known newspaper in an isolated corner of Greenland, was picked up by an influential Danish paper, noticed by the Canadian Embassy in Copenhagen, and then picked up by CBC Radio. Hans Island had its first fleeting moments of fame. After my article on Hans Island appeared in the Greenlandic and Danish press, Tom Hoyem, the Danish minister from Greenland, chartered a helicopter from Thule Air Base to the island and raised the Danish flag, leaving a bottle of Denmark's finest chaps at its base. Whatever could have happened on that barren rock causing so much fuss? Well, during the summer of 1983, Ken Harper had visited the island, and so had a scientist from the company Dome Petroleum, as the name suggests, a now defunct oil company located in Canada. The company had sent several scientists over several summers to do research into the resources around Hans Island, without the knowledge of the Canadian government, who had signed a treaty making this very much illegal. You can imagine the outrage these findings brought, why it led to a Danish minister flying to the island, planting the Danish flag and leaving a bottle of schnapps that the pilot of that helicopter later flew back to get for himself. I have no idea. Once hearing about this, however, the Canadians would fly to the island, take out the Danish flag, plant a Canadian one, and leave a bottle of Canadian whiskey, thus starting the back and forth that went on for years. I found some Canadian sources that, strangely enough, say that Canada started this tradition. However, they don't mention anything about Dome Petroleum or the article in the Greenlandish newspaper or any extra details. They just say one day Canada decided to do this, and thus the back and forth started. While cross-referencing and looking at several sources, it seems like the second story was born from a game of telephone and not doing their own research. So I tend to believe the first story. Also, there's proof that the first story is real and how it happened. So for a while, a back and forth went generally unnoticed outside of Denmark, Greenland, and Canada until 2004, when the defense minister of Canada invaded the islands. So since 2005, both parties had agreed to notify each other when there would be a visit, and in 2015 a proposal was put forth as a solution for the conflict. Since then, the countries been working on a conclusion, and thus the war finally ended in 2022. And I think this is a good time to take a little breather. So much information isn't good for you, so let's play a little game called Who Deserves Hans Island? On the left, we have the red, white and maple, Canada, who claims it should be theirs because Britain discovered it and later gave those Arctic properties to Canada. On the right, we have the red, white and Legoland, Denmark, who claims bullshit. It was the Americans who discovered the land with the help of Greenlandish guides, so therefore we deserve it. Cast your votes now in the comments. I expect an alinea of a minimum of 200 words with your reasoning. My personal vote goes to option 3. Hans Island should be independent. This tug and pull on it has been going on for way too long, and it deserves to be left alone. Now, did we all have a little fun deliberating over who should have the ownership over Hans Island? Did it take you 18 years like Canada and Denmark? Which is honestly way too long for a decision you could just have rock, paper, scissors. Finally, in 2020, So, however, they reached the conclusion. They King Solomon's it and cut the baby right in half. Which brings us to the last chapter of this story. I think it was the friendliest wars of all wars. A win for Canada, a win for Denmark and Greenland, and a win for the indigenous people. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly said on the day of the signing. This sentiment was shared by Greenland's Prime Minister Knut B. Egede and Danish Foreign Minister Jeppe Kofod on June the 14th, 2022, where they exchanged a bottle of whiskey one last time and signed the treaty. We see a gross violation of international rules unfolding in another part of the world, said Kofod. May this agreement inspire other countries to follow the same path. The other part of the world clearly references the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which had happened in February of that year. And this is not just speculation. Kofod name-dropped Putin. While the talks about resolving this conflict has been going on for several years before the invasion, at the moment of signing it, it was used as a diplomatic example of how to resolve territory conflicts. And I don't know, for some reason, it kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Yes, what's happening in Ukraine shouldn't happen. But why not also mention Hong Kong? Why not also mention China and Taiwan and the territorial conflicts that are going on there? Why don't those conflicts get a mention? Why is no one mentioning that one of the reasons why it was the friendliest wars is that Hans Island was nothing more than an inhabited rock? There were no people who all of a sudden became an ethnical minority because a couple of guys who deemed themselves important drew a line just a couple of inches to the right. Something that has happened way too often in history and led to mass immigration at its best or ethical cleansing at its worst. And yet somehow those important people don't learn and keep doing it. We saw it in the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall, yet that didn't do anything for this conflict. What had changed was simply the times. The outlook on war is changing, and it mostly because of social media. We have entered a time where war has never been as present in our world as it is now. We see it, we consume it, we share it, no matter how far it is from us. No war is greater than another, and war has never been fun. It's been glorified, but now that we can literally see it on TikTok, that facade is shattering fast. Those glorifications start to seem distasteful. War, just another thing social media has ruined for us. Now all we can do is look back to the good old times when we could still have fun with it without everyone getting their panties in a twist. The Whiskey War, product of its time, a time when war was still fun. So, that was my deep dive into the Whiskey War. If you enjoyed it and stuck with me to the end, for starters, you're amazing. And consider giving me a like, comment and subscribe maybe. Like I mentioned in the intro, this is my very first video. I didn't even have a microphone yet when I finished this script. So nothing else for you to see for now. However, I hope to upload another video in like a month. Not sure what it will be about. I'm working on multiple scripts right now. One is about a super fun old-timey hoax. I love old-timey hoax. Another one about less funny modern pranksters. If you have any suggestions, comment them down below or email me, and goodbye.